No one wakes up and says, "I want to be an assassin." Not in the medieval world. Not when choosing that path meant more than blood. It meant darkness, silence, hunger, and eventually death, not the kind that's honorable, but the kind that makes people forget you even existed. And yet, assassins existed. They weren't born. They weren't made in secret temples, trained in elegant arts of silence under moonlight, armed with whispers and wisdom. They didn't meditate to flutes or glide across rooftops in perfect synchrony. That's Hollywood. That's myth. The real assassin was the man you never noticed. The one hunched in the corner of the tavern, drinking weak ale, counting his last copper coin. He didn't look dangerous. He looked tired, hungry, cold. That's what real killers looked like. Not gods. Not warriors. Just men too broken to go on, and too desperate not to. Because in the medieval world, being an assassin wasn't a career. It was a consequence. The end of the road. You didn't choose to be a killer. It wasn't something you trained for. You became one when everything else failed. Maybe you were a peasant. Your farm dried out, your goats were stolen, and your last child coughed blood through winter. No one helped. You stole bread. Got caught. Got whipped. Lost a hand. Lost your home. Maybe you were a soldier. Fought for a baron who died in battle. His heir refused to pay. You wandered town to town, scarred and proud but starving. One night someone offered you a job. A name. A pouch of coins. Maybe you were worse. A thief. A drunk. A killer already. Not for politics. Not for glory. But because you needed shoes. Because someone else got to the food first. Because the world had already made you a monster, and monsters survive. That's who became assassins. They weren't glamorous. They weren't noble. They weren't even remembered. They were, as one old chronicler wrote, men whose names were never spoken, whose footsteps fell without sound, and whose hands did the work no other dared dirty. That's about the most romantic thing anyone's ever said about them. The truth? Even the people who hired assassins didn't like them. Because if you could kill a bishop today, what's stopping you from killing a prince tomorrow? The first contract. It always began in a tavern. Never during the day. Never at the front table. Somewhere deep in the corner, two men sat. One spoke. The other didn't. The one who spoke didn't say much. He didn't describe the politics. He didn't rant about justice. He didn't offer a speech or a cause. He just said a name, and slid a pouch across the table. The pouch was light. It always was. Only half the payment, maybe less. But to the man across the table, it weighed 1,000 lives. It meant food, a place to sleep, a road out of this cursed town, and a target. That was all it took. No ceremony, no sword. Just a name, a nod, and the understanding that one of them would vanish, and the other might too. The job? Simple. Kill someone important. Someone rich enough to afford guards. Careful enough to have their meals tested. Powerful enough that their death would make others whisper for months. You were never sent to kill Tom the baker. No. You were hired to end barons, bishops, knights, people who wouldn't see you coming, and wouldn't stay dead quietly. Tools of the trade. The weapons of an assassin were not beautiful. They were crude, rusted, improvised. A rope was useful. You could climb with it. Strangle. tie something shut, or hang someone where no one would find them. But rope frayed. It snapped. It creaked. One wrong knot, one wrong pull, and the night turned loud. A dagger was better. Cheap. Small. Easy to hide. The right kind of steel made little sound. But one stab rarely killed. You had to hit the right spot. Or do it again. And again. And again, in silence. Poison? Ha! You'd think it was elegant. That's what the stories say. But in real life, medieval poisons were unreliable. You crushed roots. Dried frogs. Mixed ash and bile and prayed it didn't explode before reaching the cup. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it made your target vomit for hours and survive angrier than before. Sometimes it just tasted funny, and they called the guards before sipping. And remember, nobles didn't eat alone. They had tasters. Servants. Dogs. Sometimes even priests blessed their meals. Poisoning someone wasn't subtle. It was a gamble. And you couldn't afford to gamble. Blending in. The assassin's true skill wasn't killing. It was pretending. You couldn't look suspicious. You couldn't ask questions. You couldn't blink too often or avoid eye contact too much or smile at the wrong person. You had to become someone else. A merchant passing through. A scribe delivering letters. A priest from a distant abbey. A cousin twice removed, visiting before Lent. No fake IDs. No wigs. No makeup. If you wanted to look different, you rubbed ash on your skin. Smiled less. Walked differently. That was it. Your disguise was only as strong as your silence. Because once someone asked, "Where did you say you were from again?" you had about 3 heartbeats to come up with an answer. Or a way out. The moment. The hardest part of the job wasn't waiting. Or sneaking. Or stabbing. It was leaving. Because the moment your blade struck, the world changed. You weren't a ghost anymore. You were blood. You were footsteps. You were real. Guards would find the body. Servants would scream. Bells would ring. Dogs would bark. Doors would lock. The city would shut itself down. And you had to be gone before that. Not walking. Not hiding. Running. Through alleys. Through sewer grates. Over fences. Into the night. No applause. No payment, not yet. Only fear. And sweat. And the taste of iron in your mouth as you gasped for air and prayed no one saw your face. And then what? If you made it out, and that's a big if, you didn't rest. You didn't spend your silver. You didn't visit family. You didn't sleep under your real name. You left. That town. That road. That identity. You moved to the next place. Changed your story. Waited. Until another man in another tavern said another name and slid another pouch across the table. And you nodded. Because what else could you do? You weren't a man anymore. You were a function. A solution to a problem no one wanted to solve themselves. Conclusion: a life without legacy. There are no statues of assassins. No gravestones. No folk songs. No saints. They weren't honored. They weren't hated. They were erased. If you did your job right, no one knew your name. And if they did, you were already dead. Because the medieval world didn't forgive shadows. It feared them. And when it found them, it burned them. Assassins didn't live long. They didn't die well. But while they were alive, they changed history in silence. The pouch never weighed enough. It was always smaller than expected. It never jingled like a sack of fortune. It just rested in your hand silently. A few silver coins, cold and heavy. Not enough to start a new life. Barely enough to get through the week. But to a desperate man, that pouch meant everything. And to the man across the table, the one sliding it forward with a gloved hand, it meant nothing. It wasn't generosity. It wasn't trust. It was bait. Because assassins were never paid in full. Not unless they were fools. Half now, never later. When a contract was offered, the deal was always the same, half the money now. The rest after the job was done. Of course, after could mean anything. After the target is confirmed dead. After the funeral. After we know you didn't talk. After we kill you ourselves. Sometimes the second half of the payment didn't even exist. It was just a trick to keep you quiet, to keep you moving forward, toward the blade, toward the wall, toward the grave. And you accepted it. Because what else could you do? You were already dead to the world. You were just trying to buy time before someone else made it official. The price of a name. The name you were given wasn't just a target. It was a sentence. It was usually someone protected, powerful, and paranoid. A nobleman surrounded by guards. A corrupt bishop who hadn't walked outside in a decade. A merchant prince who slept with a dagger under his pillow and 6 dogs in the hallway. You weren't being asked to end a life. You were being asked to enter a locked room inside a burning castle, and then vanish without a trace. And the pay? 12 silver coins if you were lucky. 15 if the man hiring you was rich. 20 if the target was hated. But no matter how high the number, the reality stayed the same. You'd never live long enough to spend it all. The tools of death. Killing was never clean. It was never silent. It was never easy. But the world expected you to make it look that way. You were supposed to be invisible. Efficient. Merciless. The tools at your disposal? Brutal, makeshift, unreliable. Poison, the assassin's favorite in stories, was often the least dependable. You could craft it from roots, mushrooms, minerals, even the glands of toads, but it was as likely to kill your client as your victim. One misstep in brewing, and the poison might foam, change color, or reek of something foul. And if anyone saw or smelled it, you were done. Most nobles didn't even taste their own wine. It passed through 2 servants and a dog before reaching their lips. You'd need to bribe a cook, a maid, the cupbearer, and hope none of them betrayed you first. Rope was useful, but not subtle, not quick. Strangling someone took time and strength. You had to wrap from behind, tighten with all your might, and hold while they kicked, flailed, and gasped for air. You prayed they didn't scream, that no one heard the floorboards creak. One groan, and it was over. Not for them, for you. Blades, of course, were the standard. Knives. Daggers. Anything that could pierce quietly. But knives slipped. Daggers dulled. Blood sprayed. Bones resisted. The movies make it look easy. One strike, one gasp, collapse. But reality was far messier. Your hand shook. The body convulsed. Blood got everywhere, on your boots, your clothes, your hands. You panicked. You dropped something. You left a trail. And trails led to gallows. Payment in lies. The man who hired you smiled when you succeeded. And then he disappeared. No one ever met you twice. No one ever thanked you. No one ever introduced you to friends. Because in their eyes you were dangerous. You had seen too much. Knew too much. Heard names. Witnessed weakness. You were no longer useful. You were now a liability. And if your client was smart, and most were, they already had a plan to erase you. A second assassin. A tipped-off guard. A note to the steward that said, "If a stranger asks for me, slit his throat. And if he died? Good. One less risk." Reputation is a death sentence. Assassins didn't build reputations. They avoided them. If your name was whispered too often, if taverns started saying things like, "He's good," or "He never fails," then it was already too late. Because the more people believed in you, the more they feared you. And when people fear you, they act first. You might walk into a job thinking you were the hunter, and find the guards waiting. Not for the target. For you. No questions. No warning. Just cold steel in the gut. That's the price of fame. Better to be unknown. Unseen. Forgotten. Better to live quietly and die poor, than to be remembered and buried in pieces. You never got to spend it. Even if you lived, even if the job went perfectly, even if you escaped clean, you didn't get to enjoy the reward. You couldn't buy land. People would ask where you got the money. You couldn't get drunk. You talked too much. You couldn't even wear new boots without someone wondering how a wandering stranger could afford them. You spent your silver on food, travel, disguises, a bribe here, a bolt of cloth there. Then it was gone. And when it was gone, you took another job. Not because you wanted to. Because you had to. Because the only thing more dangerous than being an assassin was being a former assassin, broke and exposed. A moment of doubt. Every killer had one. That night where the silver felt too cold. The blade felt too heavy. The silence in the woods felt like judgment. They wondered, "Who am I now? What have I become?" But the medieval world had no room for reflection. You couldn't cry. You couldn't confess. You couldn't write a letter, or beg a priest, or build a church in apology. You just moved on. One village to the next. One job to the next. One sin to the next. Until the only thing you recognized in the mirror was the fear in your own eyes. The one rule, don't get caught. There were no laws protecting you. No unions. No codes of conduct. If you were caught, you died. Publicly. Painfully. Spectacularly. Your body was nailed to a post. Your limbs torn apart. Your tongue cut out. Your genitals burned. Your ashes scattered in places where no prayers were allowed. And people clapped. Because they weren't cheering justice. They were cheering relief. One more shadow gone. One more whisper silenced. One more nameless killer erased. A trade of flesh and fear. Assassins didn't traffic in coin. They traded in flesh. In fear. In silence. They were the ghost you didn't see. The name you didn't speak. The price you paid to make your problems disappear. But no one paid enough. Because at the end of every job, every run, every body, you were still there. Still breathing. Still haunted. And silver couldn't buy peace. An assassin's greatest weapon isn't a blade. It's a story. A lie that walks beside him. A disguise stitched from silence, dust, and borrowed names. A cloak not of fabric, but of invisibility, not from the eyes, but from memory. The assassin doesn't just sneak into castles or over walls. He sneaks into lives, into routines, into the space between what people expect and what they never question. To kill and survive, you don't need to be strong. You need to be forgettable. The disappearance begins long before the kill. When an assassin accepts a job, the vanishing starts at once. First, he leaves the village. Not with a wave or goodbye. He doesn't say he's going on a journey. He simply isn't seen again. Maybe a few people notice. A neighbor wonders why the fire hasn't been lit. A child asks where the quiet man went. Then silence replaces him. The house rots. The field grows wild. And no one asks again. He changes his name. Sometimes more than once. He grows a beard, then shaves it. He stoops when he walks. He limps. He switches from left hand to right. Not because it helps him fight, but because it confuses those who might remember. He travels under assumed professions. A salt merchant. A traveling scribe. A tinker. A mute. A sickly cousin. A mourning priest. The fewer questions people ask, the better. Because when someone becomes curious, the game is already over. The assassin's true enemy, recognition. It doesn't take much. A boy in a village who says, "Didn't I see you last winter in Westmore?" A serving girl who frowns and mutters, "You don't sound like you're from Aldholt." A guard who stares too long, not because he knows you, but because he doesn't like not knowing. That's enough. A single moment of recognition, real or imagined, is a crack in the mask. And once the mask cracks, you don't get a second. You either disappear again, or die. The performance begins. To get close to a target, you must become part of the background. You might arrive at the estate days, even weeks, before the kill. You're not there to strike. You're there to blend. Maybe you work in the stables. Maybe you help stack crates at the rear gate. Maybe you sweep floors near the chapel. You learn the guards' names. Not by asking, by listening. You learn who drinks too much. Who naps during shifts. Who hates who. Which doors creak. Which ones don't. You eat what they eat. Sleep where they sleep. You laugh at their jokes, even when they sicken you. You nod when they complain about taxes, about their lord, about the grain. And when someone asks you something, anything, you smile and shrug. I just carry sacks. I don't speak the language well. I'm from the hills near the river. Simple. Short. Nothing that invites follow-up. You become boring. The closer you get, the harder it is. Striking from afar is rare. Poison is unreliable. Arrows miss. Knives must be guided by the hand. So you get close. You learn when the noble sleeps. When he drinks. When he's alone. You wait for a moment, just one, where no one is watching. When the doors are closed. When the dog is outside. When the guard is laughing with a maid. And even then, your hands shake. Not from fear, not only fear, but from adrenaline, from memory, from the weight of knowing that after this moment, nothing will be the same again. You open the door. You step through. You strike. The mask never comes off. You might think the worst part is over. It isn't. Because now you are in motion. Even if the target is dead, even if you escape the estate, the performance doesn't stop. In fact, it intensifies. You don't run. Not at first. You walk. You leave the tools behind. Burn your disguise. Change your gait. Clean your hands in a stream. You become someone else again, before the sun rises. When the alarm rings, you're already outside the town. Buying apples. Asking directions. Petting a goat. And no one remembers that you were ever there. But you remember. Always. When you stay too long. Assassins sometimes grow arrogant. Or tired. Or lonely. They linger. They return to a tavern where someone once smiled at them. They keep a name they like. They wear a coat they stole from a dead man 2 jobs ago. And that's when it happens. The man across the room squints. The woman behind the bar pauses. Someone mutters, "Don't I know you?" You feel it in your spine. In your lungs. The world turns sharp. You're not the assassin anymore. You're the suspect. And the next step you take decides whether you'll vanish again, or be nailed to the village gate before dusk. The sound of silence. The greatest skill of the assassin is listening. Not with ears, with instincts. You hear what isn't said. You feel what isn't shown. A look that lasts too long. A servant who closes a door too gently. A guard who always stands just a little too close. When you feel that shift, when the rhythm of the place changes, you don't question it. You move. Fast. Because once people start to suspect, they never stop. Disguises are not costumes. You don't dress up to impress. You dress to vanish. Clothes must be dusty, common, the kind that doesn't match any heraldry or trade. Colors fade in the sun. Fabrics wrinkle. Embroidery draws attention. You don't wear anything someone would remember. Your face? Neutral. Forgettable. No scars. No charm. No intensity. You practice blankness in the mirror. You walk without rhythm. You speak in a flat tone. Because if someone can describe you, they will. And your job is to leave no description behind. You don't have friends, you have witnesses. Everyone you talk to becomes a risk. So you limit speech. Limit gestures. Limit kindness. You don't help the beggar. You don't flirt with the maid. You don't drink with the guards. You nod. You pass through. You vanish. Loneliness becomes your armor. Because no one misses a shadow. No one mourns a ghost. Death is not the end, discovery is. Being killed is bad. Being caught is worse. When you're dead, you're gone. But when you're caught, people dig. They question. They name. They trace. And they might find others. Your employer. Your clients. Other kills. So death becomes a mercy, for you, and for those who used you. And if you're lucky, your final breath is silent, fast, and in the woods. If not, it's in chains. In fire. Before a crowd. The life you never had. You see them sometimes, from a distance. Families laughing at market. Children chasing chickens. A man sitting on a porch, repairing a wheel. You remember vaguely when you dreamed of that. But now, even your dreams wear masks. You've become the thing people fear but can't name. The stranger. The man in the corner. The face that looks familiar. And you walk on. Not because you want to. Because there's nowhere left to stop. Curses in the wind, myths and fear of assassins. No one ever said the word assassin out loud. Not in a village square. Not in a market. Not even behind closed doors. It was a word that moved like smoke, drifting through alleys, carried in glances, whispered behind hands. It was never spoken boldly, never claimed. And when it was said, it came attached not to fact, but to something older, deeper, more terrifying than truth. Fear. Not the rational fear of a knife in the dark, but something ancient. The fear of being watched by someone who shouldn't exist. The fear of being chosen. Because in the medieval world, assassins were not just men. They were shadows. They were ghosts. They were curses in human skin. And the people who lived near them? They believed things. It started with small things, unexplained noises at night, a cow gone lame, a child with fever. People didn't need proof to blame a stranger. They just needed silence. If you were quiet, you were hiding something. If you didn't smile, you were hexing someone. If you left without saying goodbye, you had already cursed the house. Assassins, they said, could breathe death through walls. They could turn invisible if they drank blood by moonlight. They made pacts with forest spirits and spoke in dead tongues. Old women warned their grandchildren. Don't look at strangers in the eye. They might hex your name right out of your soul. Men crossed themselves when travelers passed too quietly. Priests gave sermons about unseen hands that do the devil's work. And no one asked for names. Because everyone knew, if you asked too loudly, you might be next. Even tools were feared. A sharp dagger with no markings? Obviously forged in cursed iron. A vial of bitter herbs? Witchcraft. A dark cloak that repelled rain? Enchanted. And if someone found you carrying a rope, a small knife, or, God forbid, powdered root for poison? That wasn't evidence. That was a death sentence. The crowd didn't need explanation. The rope was already being tied. They said assassins didn't sleep. That they wept blood if they tried. That they couldn't step inside a church unless the stones cracked. That wolves followed them but never attacked. That they could walk past dogs, past guards, past locked gates, because they were never fully there to begin with. Some tales claimed that an assassin could kill with a word, if he whispered it while a candle burned out. Others said he could swap faces with a dying man. That he could vanish into his own shadow. That he could lie in wait beneath a bed, unmoving, for 3 days and nights without food or breath, until the moment came. Was any of it true? No. It didn't have to be. Because fear doesn't need truth. It needs distance. It needs the unknown. And the assassin, more than anything, was unknowable. Sometimes, a noble died in the night. Clean. Silent. No wounds. Just dead. And people didn't ask how. They asked who? And someone always said, it was one of them. Not by name. Never by name. Just a gesture. A glance. A nod toward a man who arrived last week and left too soon. A face that no one remembered clearly. A voice that never rose above a murmur. Sometimes the suspicion alone was enough. A merchant would be found dead. No wounds. No blood. Just breathless and cold. And the servants would whisper, he met someone yesterday. A man in gray. He asked no questions. He paid in full. And he never came back. In some villages, they claimed that an assassin once stared at a man until the man choked on his soup. That he left behind no footprints in snow. That he carved symbols into mirrors with just his gaze. None of it was true. But try telling that to a mother whose child died in their sleep after a traveler walked past her door. Try telling that to a mayor whose dog refused to enter a room after a stranger left. Try telling that to the crowd outside the tavern, where a man had been found strangled with a rope made of vines no one recognized. The myths served a purpose. They made people cautious. They made people afraid. But more than that, they protected the assassin. Because when people think you're a monster, they don't try to understand you. They don't investigate. They don't connect dots. They just close the door. They pray. They pretend you were never there. And for a killer who survives by silence, that's the greatest gift fear can give. But there was a price. Because myths don't only protect. They isolate. You couldn't ask for help. You couldn't stay in one place too long. Even if you meant no harm, your face alone might send a family into hiding. You could walk through a village in daylight, hungry, wounded, half dead, and still the people would not speak to you. They'd watch. From shutters. From the corners of fields. And if you looked back, they'd turn away like they hadn't seen. You became a symbol. Not a man. You were the shape they feared in the woods. The reason their cattle died. The whisper they used to keep children from running off at dusk. If you're not quiet, the pale man will come. If you don't eat, he'll take your tongue. If you lie, he'll know, and he'll come for you in the dark. They didn't know your name, but your legend had 1,000, and none of them were yours. Sometimes you'd hear them talk about you, not knowing you were right there, sitting at the edge of the inn, dressed as a farmer, eyes down, hands still. They'd say, "I heard one once slipped into a bishop's room, killed him, and left before the candle burned halfway down. They say they can't die unless you cut out their heart and salt it. I knew a woman whose husband insulted a stranger on the road. That night his guts were found in a stew pot." You didn't respond. You didn't blink. You didn't let yourself feel the heat rising in your face, from the lie, from the fear, from the truth hiding beneath both. You just waited. Until the stories ended. Until the silence returned. And then you left. No one wanted to know the truth. That you were once just a boy. That you had a mother, a brother, a real name. That you used to laugh. To cry. To believe in saints and songs and summers that never ended. They didn't want that. They needed you to be a curse. So you let them. Because the alternative, being remembered, was worse. Being remembered meant being hunted. Being named. Being caught. So you faded. Again. Into the wind. Into the stone. Into the mud that stuck to your boots and never quite came off. You became, once more, the thing no one could find. A story told too often to be true, and far too often to be false. No rest for the wicked, the assassin's endgame. There is no retirement for a man like him. No warm hearth. No quiet cottage. No child on his knee asking, "What did you used to do?" He cannot answer that question. Because the answer is something that has followed him all his life, and will follow him still when he no longer breathes. He was a shadow in a world of fire. And the world remembers fire. He tried once. Long ago. After a job that went too smoothly, that left no blood, no scream, no chase, he kept walking. Past the edge of the city. Through forests, past rivers, over hills. Until he reached a village so small it didn't even have a name. He bought a new tunic. Grew a beard. Let his hair grow long and wild. He learned the names of the animals there, not the people. He spoke little. He helped mend a roof. carried buckets from the well, shared bread when no one asked. And for a moment, just a breath of a season, he thought perhaps, just perhaps, the ghosts would stay behind. But ghosts are loyal. One night, there was a knock at the door. Just one. Soft. A child delivering bread, perhaps. Or a lost traveler. Or a neighbor needing help with the pigs. He didn't open it. He didn't move. He simply waited. And when the second knock came, slower, heavier, he knew. Not who. Not why. Just that it had come. His time. He didn't grab a sword. He didn't light a torch. He didn't run. He opened the back door and stepped into the dark. And never returned. That was lesson 1. You do not get to rest. Not ever. Not because the world hates you, but because it remembers you. Even when others forget. Even when you forget yourself. The world remembers the work. And the work always demands a price. He learned to move more carefully after that. He changed names not once a year, but once a month. He never slept in the same place twice. Never spoke to a child twice. Never looked anyone in the eye too long. Because people see things. And when they see too much, even when they don't understand it, they whisper. And whispers become stories. Stories become questions. And questions? They become gallows. He watched others like him try to settle. One took a wife and built a bakery. He was hanged a year later when someone recognized a scar on his wrist. Another bought land and called himself a retired guard. He was found dead in a well, a note pinned to his chest. You didn't kill the right man. One vanished so thoroughly that people said he'd become a hermit priest in the mountains. But then someone found a blood-stained robe and a half-burned contract hidden beneath the altar. No one weeps for ghosts. No one protects them when they try to live again. And then there are the others, the ones who can't stop. Not because they love killing, but because it's the only thing they're good at. Because after 10, 20, 30 years in the dark, what else is left? They walk into villages like wolves that forgot how to hunt anything but men. They take contracts for coins they don't need. They kill men they don't even hate. Not for money. Not for glory. Just to remember what it feels like to be useful. To exist. Even if just for a heartbeat. But they don't last either. Not because they're weak. But because the world is tired of shadows. And eventually it strikes back. One slips on a muddy path. One underestimates a boy with a pitchfork. One is betrayed by a girl he didn't realize was watching from the rafters. Their ends aren't glorious. They're forgotten. Just like they were in life. He once asked himself, what is the end of a man like me? Not death. Death is simple. The end is when no one knows you were ever here. When your name fades. Your deeds fade. Even your sins fade. When the last person who feared you forgets what they feared. That is the true death of the assassin. And he waits for it. With dread. And longing. Sometimes he walks into a town and no one looks up. No one pauses. No one whispers. He eats. Sleeps. Leaves. And it haunts him. Because it means he's no longer feared. And that can only mean two things. Either the world has forgotten him. Or it is about to remember. Violently. One winter, he returned to a village from long ago. Not to settle. Just to see if anything remained. It had changed, of course. The well had dried. The tavern had collapsed. The road had shifted. No one remembered his face. But a boy, a stranger's son, saw him and ran to his mother and said, "That man, he walks like the ones in the stories." And in that moment he knew he could not stay. Because even when you bury the past, its bones remain, and children still trip over them. He walked out into the snow. Alone. Again. Always. The wind carried no voices. The trees made no sounds. The world didn't weep for him. And that, he thought, was fair. Because he had chosen this. Or if he hadn't, he had chosen it enough times that it no longer mattered. There is no rest for men like him. No peace. No name. Just motion. Endless. Wordless. Faceless. A man with no legacy. No redemption. Just the faintest hope that, one day, the world might no longer recognize his shadow. And when that day comes, he will know he is finally free. Or finally dead. The final veil. He arrived in Dernwick at dawn. The road behind him was dust and regret, and the road ahead offered nothing but silence. Dernwick wasn't marked on most maps. It was the kind of place where names were forgotten on purpose, where taverns whispered but never sang. The kind of place where people came to disappear, or to make someone else disappear. He was neither young nor old. His cloak was weathered, boots stitched and restitched a dozen times, blades silent at his hip. He didn't speak when he arrived. He didn't need to. The innkeeper at the hollow lantern took one look at him and handed over a key. Top floor, corner room, creaky floorboards, window facing the alley. No questions asked? The man knew what kind of guest he was dealing with. He'd seen the eyes before. Eyes that had stared too long into dark places and now carried a piece of the void within them. The assassin unpacked nothing. He had nothing to unpack. A rolled map, a tiny flask, a pair of gloves that no longer fit right. His real belongings, silence, patience, calculation, were all invisible. He sat on the edge of the bed, cracked fingers tracing the leather sheath of his knife. Tonight would be his final job. Not because he said so, but because the world had decided it. The whispers had grown louder over the years. The walls had grown thinner. The shadows shorter. His target was Sir Theobald Creswick, former war hero, now lord over half the northern counties, and lately, a thorn in the crown's side. They said he was planning rebellion. They said he was hoarding food while villages starved. They said he had a taste for cruelty wrapped in charm. The assassin didn't care. He didn't ask why anymore. A name, a location, and payment, that was the extent of his world now. Justice was for priests and poets. But Creswick was different. Not because he was powerful or dangerous. The assassin had killed worse. No, what made Creswick different was that the assassin had once known him. Years ago, under another name, before either of them had titles or scars. They had stood side by side during a siege that lasted 4 nights and 3 winters, had shared stories over blackened stew and blood-soaked floors. The man who now needed killing had once pulled him from rubble, coughing and laughing, half dead but alive. And now someone wanted him dead. The assassin did not hesitate. Nostalgia was poison. He marked the estate on his map. High on the hill, walls thick as trust, guards everywhere. No route was safe, but he knew how to make unsafe routes bend. There would be a wedding feast in 3 days' time. Nobles, noise, wine, distraction. He would strike then. 3 days passed like smoke. He moved as ghosts did, unmarked, unseen. He bribed a stable boy with a coin and a lie. He watched the servants come and go, memorizing their rhythm. He timed the bell tower. He slipped into a servant's robe and rehearsed smiles that didn't reach his eyes. On the morning of the feast, he entered the estate with a tray of pears and poison. The great hall was a riot of gold and silk, laughter forced and faces powdered. Music played from a balcony, the sound echoing through the stone like a prayer that no one believed in. The assassin walked past nobles too drunk to notice a man's shoes. He passed guards more interested in roasted duck than danger. He reached the table. Creswick sat at the head, wearing a smile that didn't match his eyes. Older, broader, but unmistakable. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, something shifted. Creswick's smile faltered. The assassin froze. It was not recognition, not quite. But it was something else. A flicker of memory? A shadow of war? The assassin placed the tray, bowed, and turned. The moment was gone. But he'd seen it. Creswick knew. He didn't return to the inn. He didn't have to. It would be watched now. Instead, he moved through alleyways thick with mold and rot, the scent of old crimes. He reached the abandoned mill at the river's bend, his fallback shelter. There he waited. He had no plan now. The job had soured. There was no clean strike anymore, only chaos and consequence. Night fell like a dropped curtain. A rustle. A voice. Still graceful, even after all these years. The assassin turned. Creswick stood at the doorway, alone, unarmed, or appearing to be. His cloak was fine wool, but his boots were muddy. A man who still knew how to walk quietly. "You knew I'd be here," the assassin said. "I remembered the siege," Creswick replied. "And how you think." Silence stretched between them like wire. "You're here to kill me," Creswick said. "Why?" "I don't ask why," the assassin replied. "But I'll ask anyway," Creswick said. "Because you used to be more than this. That stung more than poison." "Used to be," the assassin said softly. They sat, across a beam of moonlight, two relics of a forgotten war. Creswick didn't plead. The assassin didn't threaten. They talked. About old comrades now buried or mad. About kings who spoke of honor while carving up peasants. About how the world breaks men and offers no map back. "Will you do it?" Creswick asked. "Yes," the assassin said. "But not tonight." Creswick nodded. "Fair enough." He left. Days passed. The assassin waited for death. It didn't come. No guards. No bounty hunters. Just wind and waiting. Then a letter, folded thrice, sealed with wax, slipped beneath the door. It read, "There is no reward for sparing me. There is no punishment for completing your task. Only a choice. One of us will vanish either way." No signature. But none was needed. The assassin burned the letter. He walked to the cliffs that overlooked the sea, the place where deserters once threw down their swords. He stood there till the wind made his scars ache. That night, he made his choice. They never found Creswick's body. Or the assassin's. Only rumors. Some say they killed each other in a duel under starlight. Some say they ran together, forged a new name, a new country. Some say one of them still walks the edges of war, blade in hand, waiting for a name worth dying for. But in Durnwick, in the inn called the Hollow Lantern, there's a room that stays empty. A room with a creaky floorboard, a window facing the alley, and a scent of ash that never quite leaves. And sometimes, on cold nights, the innkeeper swears he hears boots pacing, slow, measured, ghost-like. Waiting. The assassin's crossroads. The night was thick with fog, and the alleys of the lower quarter breathed like a beast asleep, slow, rhythmic, steaming with filth and fear. Talon crouched beneath a sagging timber awning, his cloak soaked with sweat and mist. He had not slept for 2 days, nor eaten for one. The coins he had taken from the Baron's steward 2 nights earlier were already spent, half on bribes, half on silence. Silence always costs more than anything else. He adjusted the leather straps of his belt, checking the poison pin hidden beneath his cuff, the slim dagger against his thigh, and the garrote wound tight in a leather pouch. He did not believe in luck. He believed in routine. And tonight he needed every ounce of it. It was supposed to be a simple job. Slip into the cathedral quarter, cross the garden wall of St. Viril's cloister, and eliminate Brother Cassian, the prior whose sermons had drawn too many ears, and offended the wrong ones. But something had shifted. Too many guards on the wall. A lantern lit too long in the scriptorium. A shadow that passed twice by the same window. Talon didn't need a vision to know it. The job had changed. And in his line of work, change rarely meant opportunity. It meant betrayal. He moved, swift as thought, across the garden path, avoiding the gravel that would announce him. The cold stone walls rose beside him like the ribs of a dead god, moss-covered and ancient. He stopped beneath the rose window of the chapel, where the scent of incense and damp stone mingled. Cassian would be preparing for matins. He climbed, hands sure despite the slickness of the wall, and entered through the window slit that opened to the vestry. Candlelight flickered along the floor. Voices echoed, not one, but several. And then, "Let him enter," said a voice he knew. The steward. Of course. They'd sold him. He turned, leaping silently from the ledge and rolled into the shadows below, slipping past a row of hedges. Shouts rang out behind him. Crossbows twanged. Stone shattered near his foot. He ran, not to escape, but to think. To calculate. There were only 2 choices now, disappear or retaliate. Both required a new plan. Both meant leaving behind whatever scraps of honor or vengeance he had kept warm in his chest. But Talon no longer dreamed of honor. He dreamed only of outliving the men who thought they could end him. He fled into the old quarter, where the sewers ran like veins beneath the city, where rats listened better than spies, and blind beggars remembered faces for silver. He found shelter in the wine cellar of an abandoned tavern, where the air smelled of mildew and stale blood. There, beneath barrels that hadn't seen wine in decades, he waited. And plotted. By the 3rd night, he had learned the steward's routines, bribed a stable boy to place a message in the man's saddlebag, and left false clues at the city gate implying he'd fled north. In reality, he had never left. He watched, waited, and sharpened the tools of his new trade, revenge. The steward died on the 5th night. No witnesses. No noise. Just a cold hand over the mouth, a whisper of steel in the dark, and a body that would be found floating in the river 3 days later with no name attached to its ruin. But Talon knew that was only the beginning. The real betrayal had come from higher up. And the only way to get to them was to climb, not through ambition, but through fear. He would become a ghost that haunted the edges of every candlelit chamber. A rumor dressed in blood. His next target was the Master of Whispers, a man known only as Elric. Elric never left his rooms in the Tower of Judicara, never met with spies directly, and never repeated himself. Killing him would require more than blades. It would require masks. Talon adopted a new identity, that of a mute scribe named Lorien. He studied the mannerisms of monks and learned the script of the cloistered archivists. By the time he entered Judicara's lower halls with forged documents and a monk's tonsure, he had become someone else entirely. Weeks passed. He copied manuscripts by day, walked the garden paths at dusk, and waited. It was on the 22nd day that Elric entered the scriptorium, quiet, thin, sharp-eyed. He passed Talon once, then again, then paused. "You there," Elric said, tapping the table. "Lorien, walk with me." Talon bowed and followed. They passed through winding corridors, past locked chambers and cold stone archways. Finally, they reached a circular room lined with crimson velvet and books of forbidden lore. "Sit," Elric said. Talon sat. "I know what you are," Elric whispered. The world paused. "And I have use for you." Talon didn't move. "I know who sent you. I know you killed the steward. But you are wasted on revenge. There are others I would see dead. And I will pay far more than silver." Talon said nothing. Elric smiled. "Consider this your second life." He had expected death. Instead, he was offered purpose. Talon left that room not as Lorien, nor as Talon the betrayed, but as something else entirely. A whisper given form. A man without a future, now with a mission. For the first time in years, he felt something like power. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't alone. The echo of betrayal. The rain came down in sheets that night, pounding the cobblestone streets of Durnhold like a divine judgment. Puddles formed quickly, swirling with mud and fragments of waste from the upper burrows. Above the storm, bell towers groaned, iron clappers silenced by wind so fierce it rattled the shutters of every tenement, tavern, and chapel. The world itself seemed to recoil from what was about to unfold. Deep beneath the city, however, in a web of forgotten tunnels left behind by masons and smugglers alike, a different kind of storm brewed. Silas crouched low beneath a crumbling archway, his breath steady despite the cold that bit through his threadbare cloak. He was no longer the boy who once flinched at thunder. He had learned the language of shadows, the rhythm of fear, and most of all, the silence required to survive. Tonight those lessons would be tested. He tightened the cord around his left forearm, checking the hidden blade for the 5th time, though it had never failed him. The job had come from an old contact, Thorn, a slave-returned informant who now sold secrets for silver and protection. The target, Lord Evran Halbrecht, a name that made lesser men shrink. A noble with ties to the Queen's Chamberlain, rumored to be funding rebel factions while selling weapons to both sides. Dangerous, well-guarded, and never without his hounds. But Silas had accepted the contract anyway. Not for coin. Not even for vengeance. But because someone had to remind the nobility that power did not equal safety. He waited until the moon reached its apex, slipping between ragged clouds just long enough to illuminate the drainage grate above him. That was the signal. Thorn had bribed a servant, Elora, if memory served, who agreed to unlatch the grate at precisely this hour. For what price, Silas didn't know. Perhaps she hated her master. Perhaps she loved coin. It didn't matter. With practiced movements, Silas ascended the slick stonework, pushing the grate open just enough to slip through. He emerged into the Halbrecht Estate's garden, a sculpted maze of hedges and gravel paths, now soaked and sagging from the rain. Statues of long-dead ancestors leered in silence, their moss-covered faces indifferent to what would unfold. He moved low, hugging the shadows, every step rehearsed. He bypassed the east watchtower. Thorne said the guard station there had a fondness for plum brandy, and by now he should be asleep or insensible. Silas reached the servants' entrance, a modest wooden door reinforced with iron bands. As promised, it was ajar. Elora had done her part. Inside, the warmth hit him like a blow. Hearth fires still glowed in the scullery, where the last of the maids cleaned dishes from the evening's banquet. Their laughter echoed faintly, unaware of the ghosts that slipped past behind them. Silas took the servants' stairs two at a time, knowing every second mattered. Halbrecht's chambers were on the third floor, west wing, luxurious and isolated, with only one private guard stationed outside at night. That guard never saw him coming. Silas struck from behind, swift and silent, dragging the body into a linen closet before continuing. He paused at the door, listening. Inside, the sounds of fire crackling and soft snoring. No dogs. Odd. Thorne's intel had warned of 2 mastiffs. Perhaps they had been sent elsewhere. He opened the door with surgical precision, slipping inside. The room was rich in velvet and gold, the stench of privilege as thick as the smoke from the dying fire. Lord Halbrecht lay sprawled in his canopied bed, mouth open, one arm over his chest. Silas advanced, raising the blade. "You're late," came a voice from the corner. Silas froze. From behind a velvet curtain, a second figure emerged, dressed in the robes of a priest, though his posture was that of a soldier. The man smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "Thorne said you'd come tonight? He sends his regards." The trap sprung with brutal efficiency. From behind a tapestry, 2 more men stepped out, crossbows aimed. Silas Dove rolled behind the writing desk as a bolt shattered a decanter of wine beside him. He flung his dagger, catching one in the neck, then flipped the table for cover. Halbrecht was no longer snoring. He sat upright, groggy, confused, and furious. "Alive! I want him alive!" he barked. Silas didn't wait to hear more. He kicked open the side door to the study and ran. The corridor was narrow, lined with portraits and suits of armor. Another guard rounded the corner, sword raised. Silas ducked low, slashing the man's knee, sending him crashing into a vase. He had minutes at best. The estate would be in full lockdown now. He sprinted for the eastern balcony, hoping the rain-slick roof tiles hadn't grown too treacherous. Behind him, boots thundered and alarms were raised. The leap from the 3rd floor was desperate. Silas crashed into the garden's hedgerow, pain lancing through his ribs. He staggered up, bleeding, breath ragged. Arrows whistled past as he disappeared once more into the night. By dawn, Silas was back in the crypt beneath St. Varian's chapel. Bloody, bruised, but alive. Elora was there, waiting. She looked ashamed. "They knew," she whispered. "I tried to warn you, but Thorne, he had my brother." Silas said nothing. He simply sat, letting the cold stone leach the heat from his skin. He had been betrayed, hunted, nearly broken, but not dead. And that, in his world, was still a victory. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Chapter continues. Part 2 to follow with remaining words. Continued. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and wounds. Silas did not sleep, not truly. Each time his eyes closed, he saw the priest smirk, the crossbows in the dark, and Elora's trembling hands. His ribs ached where the leap had cracked bone, An infection clawed its way through his shoulder from a graze too shallow to kill but deep enough to fester. Still he moved. Still he planned. He began with Thorn. There could be no justice without consequence, and Thorn had orchestrated his betrayal with the ease of a man long used to trading lives like coins. Silas tracked him through the alleyways of the South Docks, where fishmongers shouted in a dozen tongues and the smell of rot clung to every doorway. For 3 days he watched. On the 4th, Thorn disappeared. His body was never found. Rumors whispered of a scream in the night, a trail of blood leading into the river, and a silver ring left behind, Thorn's, unmistakable, always worn on his thumb. No one claimed to have seen Silas, and no one would dare say his name. Ghosts moved through the city in those days, and he had become one of them. He turned his focus to Lord Halbrecht next, not the man, but the system. The guards who served without question. The clerks who inked orders they never read. The runners who carried messages to faraway estates. Silas disrupted them all. Documents vanished. Coin deliveries were intercepted. Whispered threats arrived in the dead of night. Fear began to infect the halls of power. Halbrecht himself withdrew from public life, his estate fortified, his movements cloaked in secrecy. He replaced his servants weekly, installed dogs at every stairwell, and took to sleeping in different rooms each night. But it would not save him. Silas was not a man easily turned away. Elora, guilt-ridden and defiant, returned to help. She brought news from inside, of a secret chamber beneath the estate, a vault used by Halbrecht to store not just gold, but letters, confessions, and blackmail material. If Silas could reach it, he could expose everything. On the night of the Feast of Lanterns, when the city would be alight with fireworks and wine, Silas struck again. Disguised as a drunken reveler, he blended into the crowd. At midnight, when colored lights painted the walls and music echoed through the alleys, he slipped into the estate's side garden. Guards were distracted, dogs muzzled to avoid frightening the nobles. With Elora's map etched into memory, he bypassed traps and silent bells. Down into the cellar, past the wine racks, behind a false wall. There it was, the iron vault door, marked with the sigil of House Halbrecht. He opened it with tools made by firelight and fear. Inside, stacks of ledgers, sealed scrolls, coded letters. He took what he could, set fire to the rest. Flames licked up secrets that had ruined lives. By the time the guards realized what had happened, the cellar was ablaze. Silas vanished once more. The documents reached the Queen's court within a week. Heads rolled, figuratively and literally. Halbrecht was stripped of his titles and vanished into exile. His name, once feared, became a cautionary tale whispered to children of noble blood. And Silas? He did not stop. For every Halbrecht, there were 10 more. The city needed balance, and he would be the blade on the scale. The echo of betrayal would never fade, but it would no longer control him. It would sharpen him. Shadows within shadows. The city of Durnhold did not sleep, though many of its citizens did. Its breath never ceased, rising and falling like a restless beast. In the wake of Lord Halbrecht's disgrace, silence spread like frost across the noble courts. Fear held the tongues of those who once laughed behind heavy goblets of wine. Servants whispered in kitchens. Couriers moved at night. And through this shifting, silent world moved Silas, no longer just a ghost, but a myth whispered with reverence and dread. But myths, like all things, had their limits. For Silas, the end of Halbrecht was not the end of the road. It was a threshold. There was something darker beneath the surface, an organization even Thorn had feared to name. They called themselves the Pale Sigil. He first heard the name from Elora, her voice barely above a whisper as they pored over the stolen documents in the ruins beneath St. Varian's. The Pale Sigil had appeared in sealed letters between Halbrecht and distant provinces, always vague, always veiled. References to the arrangement, the silencing, the pruning of threats. "What is it?" she had asked. Silas had only shaken his head. Now, weeks later, he stood before a man who might know. Benedict Vauren had once been a tax collector, then a smuggler, then a spy. Now he kept a dusty bookshop near the abandoned Bell Foundry, where only the desperate came, and only in pairs. His hair was white and thin as parchment, his hands permanently ink-stained. "They're not in order," Benedict said, pouring bitter tea from a cracked pot. "Not in the way the Crown uses the term. They're older, quieter, not loyal to king or coin, but to something far colder, silence itself." Silas said nothing. He sipped the tea. It tasted like rust. Benedict continued. "They erase things. People, histories, entire bloodlines. They think chaos is balance. That to keep power stable, one must cut away instability like a gardener pruning dead branches. And Halbrecht? A branch. One they were willing to protect, until he became rot." The silence that followed was deep and grave. Silas stood and nodded. He left a coin pouch heavier than needed on the table. That night he returned to the crypt. The fire in the hearth had burned low. Elora sat near the embers, a shawl drawn tightly over her shoulders. "They know about you," she said before he could speak. "I know. They'll come. Let them." What neither of them said, what hung between them like fog, was the truth. There were enemies Silas could kill, and there were forces he could not even see. Still, he prepared. He changed safe houses. He destroyed the maps they had made. He buried caches of weapons in old sewer tunnels. And he watched. Watched the faces in the crowds. Watched for patterns, pauses, strange silences. It was on the 7th night that he saw the man. He stood at the edge of the market square long after the stalls had closed, wearing a hooded cloak despite the warmth. He did not move. Did not speak. But when Silas circled behind him, the man was gone. 3 nights later, Elora found a raven feather on her pillow. "It's a warning," she said, voice brittle. "It's an invitation," Silas corrected. To accept it was madness. To ignore it was death. So he followed the signs. Messages scratched into cellar doors. A baker's mark in the shape of a twisted crown. Lanterns lit in abandoned towers. A trail, subtle and deliberate, leading east, toward the Iron Throat. The Iron Throat was not a place. It was a stretch of canyon beyond the city, where the wind howled like a dying god and nothing grew. Once a quarry, now forgotten. Or so most believed. Silas arrived before dawn, cloaked and armed, every sense stretched taut. The air stank of iron and old fire. In the heart of the canyon, he found a stone archway. Beneath it, stairs descended into the dark. He entered. Torches lit by unseen hands flared to life as he passed. The air was cold. The walls smooth. Deeper and deeper he went, until sound itself seemed to vanish. Then a chamber. Round. Stone. Empty, except for 9 chairs. 8 were occupied. Hooded figures, utterly still. The 9th chair faced him. A voice echoed, not from one, but from all. You have broken balance. Silas did not flinch. I broke a tyrant, and in doing so, made space for worse. He stepped forward. Then kill me, or show me what you fear. Silence. Then one figure stood. A hand reached up, lowered the hood. It was Elora. Silas froze. She looked different, harder, colder. Eyes that had once trembled now burned with purpose. I told you, she said, they would come. And so they had. The choice beyond light. The mask sat in Silas's hand like a stone pulled from a grave, cold, heavy, and ancient. He turned it slowly, fingers brushing across the smooth obsidian surface. No eyes. No mouth. Only silence. Behind him, the 9 figures remained seated. Elora stood closest, her expression unreadable. This is not obedience, she said softly. It's acceptance. He let the mask fall to his side. I've seen what your balance costs. One of the others, cloaked in ash gray, spoke. And still, here you are. Silas did not respond. His mind churned. Memories flickered, nights running across rooftops, the trembling hands of dying targets, the scent of iron and damp stone. He had lived in shadows so long, light itself felt dangerous. He set the mask on the pedestal again. I want answers first, he said. All of them. For the first time, silence broke. One by one, the figures pulled back their hoods. Men and women, old and young, noble-born and forgotten faces. Each had scars, some visible, some not. A voice echoed from a man with a silver plate across his jaw. We were once like you. Hunters. Ghosts. Assassins. But we saw that power, unchecked, consumes everything, including itself. So you control it? No. We guide it. Trim it. Before it burns the garden. Silas paced the chamber. You killed to preserve peace? We killed to prevent war. He stopped. And the cost? Another answered, an elder woman whose eyes had long since clouded. Innocents die either way. We choose when and where, not if. It was not justice. It was management. And it chilled him. He turned to Elora. Did you know from the start? She met his gaze without hesitation. No. But they found me after the siege of Ivor's Reach. I had nothing left. Only questions. They gave me answers. You used me. I watched you. To see if you could see beyond vengeance. Silas laughed bitterly. I was never looking beyond it. You are now. The room dimmed as torches lowered. Shadows stretched and curled like breath. You can leave, the silver-jawed man said. Forget this. Burn it from your mind. We will vanish from your path. Or you step forward, take the mask, and become part of something that exists beyond glory or shame. Silas stared at the mask once more. It was not a crown. It was a shackle. And yet, behind it, a gate. Behind that gate, the architects of wars. The makers of tyrants. He remembered Thorn's face. Remembered Halbrecht's begging. Remembered his own knife. Then he spoke. I will not wear your mask, but I will walk your path, on my terms. The room stirred. That is not how it works, someone murmured. But Elora only nodded. It is now. Silas turned his back to the mask and walked out of the chamber. The stairs did not feel longer, but they felt heavier. He emerged into dawn. Fog curled at the canyon's edge. The city of Durnhold, far in the distance, waited. Weeks passed. He returned not as a blade, but as a mirror. He no longer hunted the powerful. He exposed them. Letters leaked. Names surfaced. Hidden crimes were brought to light. The city changed. But balance is a cruel tide. For each truth revealed, another secret buried deeper. For each tyrant unseated, another more clever took their place. Silas kept walking. Sometimes, in his dreams, he saw the mask again, resting on a pedestal, untouched. And in those dreams he always reached for it.